Hey, Bio30, welcome back. We're going to jump into some of our specific nutrients today. If you are watching the recordings, I apologize for the different backdrop. We're just in a different room during the graded orientation, so we're just going to work with that. For this section here, we're just going to talk about the proteins a little bit and try to understand what proteins are and why they are useful to us, where we can get them from, that sort of thing. So the proteins themselves come from this Greek word. It means proteos or proteus. The idea is that it means primary because these are going to be the first major part of a living organism for us. So they do all of the work. Anything that's happening inside of the body or inside of a cell, yes, they get created by those ribosomes, but you need to have proteins to carry out these biological processes. Otherwise, you cannot have a biological organism. So there's specialized chemicals that are going to be doing very specialized jobs for us. Their whole purpose is to build or it's to maintain the life of a cell, to maintain something that's living. So you can get different kinds of proteins. Enzymes, for example, are catalysts. They're biological catalysts, and we're going to talk about those as one of the essential pieces in a bit. Hormones are a type of chemical, and they tend to be a type of protein. Any storage, transport, structure, protection, that's all done by various proteins. And then there's a couple of, shape, structure pieces to proteins as well. The way that they can close in on their shape, get larger, get smaller, help a cell fit in through a space. We talked about like transfer over membranes, that sort of thing. There's also proteins that are, they have some sort of toxicity involved with them as well. We'll take a look and see why that might be the case, just because there are so many different kinds that you can get. So proteins, if you were ever to build one, it's essentially it's a polymer, and a polymer is when you take a whole bunch of pieces and you put them together. Poly means many, mer is merging of those many pieces. In particular, we're taking a polymer of amino acids. So amino acids are going to connect together. We call those bonds peptide bonds. We can also call a protein a polypeptide because there are multiple peptides or multiple peptide bonds connecting these amino acids together. You need to have a minimum of 3 amino acids to have a protein. If you have less than that, you just have a couple of amino acids hooked up. It doesn't really do anything at that point. Your proteins are going to differ just based on the types and the number and the order you rank all these amino acids in. So I like to think of it as Lego bricks. Think of yourself as having a red, blue, and yellow Lego brick. How many different ways can you rearrange that, right? You can put a red brick on top of a blue, or you can put it next to a blue and connect them with a yellow. You can make a chain of all three. You can connect all three by stacking them. You can stack them in different orders. So you can see, even by using the same amino acids, you get significantly different proteins that have different roles to play. For us, there's going to be 20 different amino acids that are essential to us. Um, since there are only 20, you would think that there's not really that many. But remember, we can combine them in any order we want, any length we want, provided it's three or more, which means you have an endless number of amino acids, an endless size to the proteins that you have. In fact, some of the largest ones that have been discovered or found before have 500 amino acid subunits. So that's 500 amino acids connected in some way, shape, or form with these peptide bonds. So if you kind of want to see what the numbers look like, if there's only one possible way of connecting 20 different things, you would only have 20 possibilities. That's the math is 20 to the power of 1. If there's only two different positions for each amino acid, that would mean that you have 20 to the 2, which means there's 400 possibilities. If there's three different positions available, 20 to the 3, that's 8,000. If there's 500 amino acids, meaning there's 500 different locations for those amino acids to go, it's a number that your calculator can't even compute. Your calculator just doesn't have the capacity to make that number. It is so gigantically large. It's bigger than a Google. Like it's big. So endless. Okay, we're gonna go with endless or infinite in terms of the number of proteins. Endless is probably better because there is technically an end to it, but you're never gonna get there. It's close to an infinite number. When we look at proteins, there's going to be 20 amino acids, which are coded by DNA. Then we're going to look at what's called the primary structure. The primary structure is a sequence of the amino acids that are in that peptide. So, what order have you put those amino acids in? Then we have the secondary structure, and that's how that polypeptide, that's how that protein is going to orient itself in space. It can make a different shape based on where it is. The tertiary structure takes the three-dimensional shape of that polypeptide, so we can see if you have a globular or a fibrous protein. That's going to determine what that protein's role is. Then we get into what's called the quaternary structure. The quaternary structure is how these different polypeptides function with each other. I'll talk about hemoglobin when we get there. Hemoglobin, in particular, the way that it's structured is that it has four different active sites for various products. In this case, it'll be oxygen, but we'll take a look at that in just a little bit. And then lastly, we're going to talk about denatured proteins also. If there's an extreme change in the environment, say acidity or the temperature changes, you can change the shape of a protein, and that can be useful sometimes. But if you do it too much, it's irreversible damage, which means the protein is no longer functioning in the way it's supposed to. In this case, we call it a denatured protein. So let's start with the 20 amino acids. In this case, I'm going to show you what a picture what all those amino acids are going to look like. They have a similar structure with a carbon backbone. At the very end, they have an acid group, a COO, and at one other end, you're going to see an amino group. That's why they're called amino acids. So you're going to see the NH3 or the H3N, and you're going to see the COO on every single one of these amino acids. And then they have some other chemical structure that gives them their specific amino acid. You don't need to memorize any of these. They're just showing you how many there are, what they look like. So you got the amino acids with hydrophobic side groups. These are things that are going to work very well with non-polar molecules, things that are scared of water. Valine, leucine, isoleucine, methionine, and phenylalanine. And you got those that have hydrophilic side groups, really good with water. They're going to dissolve into water very easily. That's like asparagine, glutamic acid, glutamine, histidine, lysine, arginine, and aspartic acid. That's what makes your pee smell after you've had asparagus. And lastly, we've got these guys that are in between. We don't really classify them in one or the other. They can be very basic or they can be very specialized amino acids. We've got glycine, alanine, serine, threonine, tyrosine, tryptophan, which is a funky looking one, cysteine, and one of the most unique ones, or in fact, probably the most unique one, is proline. Proline is the only amino acid that is fully a circular shape, which means if you want to bend a protein, if you want a protein to circle around on itself, you need to have a proline to turn it around. So we're going to see that a lot as well with the primary structure. So those are the 20 amino acids. Next, we have what's called the primary structure. Primary structure is how we're going to order every single one of those amino acids together. So this might be a protein, for instance. It's got a whole bunch of amino acids, and there's some order to it. And this one in particular, it's phenylalanine, leucine, serine, and cysteine in a group of 4. It could be anything. That is going to tell us what the protein is actually going to be. After that, we can look at what's called the secondary structure. Secondary structure is now taking it into the larger subunit. What is it going to look like? There's 2 distinct patterns that you can get. One is called an alpha helix, the protein that curls around on itself over and over again. You can also get what's called a beta pleated sheet. A beta pleated sheet is typically flat unless you have something to cycle around, but it layers in sheets. When we look at the tertiary structure, we can see whether those alpha helices or that beta pleated sheet is going to give us some sort of molecule. So if you have something that ends up being fibrous, you have those coils curling around each other. So if you look really carefully, you can see those proteins are coiled inside of a whole bunch of coils wrapped around each other. Fibrous, just like a strand of rope. Things like keratin, like your hair and your nails, things that are really tough, are going to be made out of these fibrous proteins. You can also get globular. Globular is going to have a whole bunch of bends and folds. It looks like a mass instead of just a line of protein. So hemoglobin, for example, is one of these. You can see how there's a whole bunch of different active sites on a little ball of hemoglobin. There's heme units in there. Okay, so that's a whole bunch of beta pleated sheets that are curled around each other. If we take a look at that molecule at the quaternary structure, we can learn a little bit more about it. Here, we've got that hemoglobin molecule again, and it's got 4 globular peptide subunits. That means that they can have 4 different hemes per hemoglobin molecule. That means you can bond 4 different groups of oxygen all at the same time on one hemoglobin molecule, which is amazing, right? You breathe in, you're breathing oxygen in, you need that oxygen to get to your body. So we have this specialized protein that takes 4 at the exact same time. Very, very useful to have that. And then lastly, we're going to talk about the denatured protein. Denatured proteins, for example, an egg, which is the background of this image, um, it's when a protein is under the influence of, say, acid, base, or temperate conditions that change the shape of the molecule, which it can't go back to. So, an egg, for example, it's got a protein called albumin in it. And albumin, when you heat it up too much, it starts to cook. And the same thing happens if you put acid into an egg, it starts to cook. If you've ever had something like, if you ever I don't know why you would do this, but maybe if you're a kid, you're having breakfast and you're making eggs and you decide to put orange juice in for some reason, you'll notice that the egg itself starts to have these little white bits forming. It's because it's denaturing from the acid, the citric acid from the juice itself. So that's why a lot of recipes don't allow you to mix, say, raw eggs with lemon juice or something that has acid in it because it will curdle and it'll start to denature before it even gets into a phase where you can use it. Here's another image of Hellman. That's what the background of this entire slideshow is. But try to understand a little bit better. We're unable to make all these amino acids. Our body can make, most of them, 11 of them. Nine of them we can't get. We call these nine ones essential amino acids because you need them. You need to have all 20, but we don't get them. So you need to get them from somewhere. In this case, we're going to get them from our diet, from the foods that we eat. If you're a vegetarian or a vegan, we consider that a low protein diet, but that's only if it's managed improperly. In fact, a vegetarian and vegan diet often gets more protein than a non vegetarian slash vegan diet, just because a lot of vegetarian products have lots of protein in them, things like beans and legumes, for example. So if it's managed properly, you can actually get a higher quality, higher volume of decent protein in your body. An example of some high protein foods, things like meat, poultry, fish. Some of the better ones are legumes, beans, soybeans, and whole grains. Those are all very good for protein. It doesn't mean you avoid the other ones. They all have high protein, so you should be getting good quantities into your bodies. Protein in our diets depends on where you get it from. There are some negatives to other foods that we can get. As Canadians, we actually typically get more protein than we actually need because we have a high meat slash dairy diet. So we get a lot of that protein that our body can actually use. That's a good thing. But it's the other things that come with those proteins which can have some issues. For instance, high protein, usually correlates to high fat as well. That's because our diet is very meat centered. Good protein, fine. But if you're getting a lot of fat, that may not be the best situation. So you don't want to get just meat centered protein. You want to have a combination of a few things so that you can get all that in your body. So vegetable proteins, on the other hand, you get more protein per calorie than meat. So if you're going to get a serving of broccoli, for instance, if you get the same amount of calories of broccoli versus the same amount of calories of a steak, you actually get more protein from that serving of broccoli than you would from the steak. Obviously, one is going to taste way better than the other one. You're going to enjoy one way more. But what I'm trying to get at is if you're able to spread out the places you're getting your foods from, you can still have a very healthy diet or even a healthier diet than what you're typically used to. Meat and dairy, they also contain almost no fiber, and fiber is going to build up, bulk up the stool in your body, as we've talked about already. That's good. Okay, if you have that stool bulked up, then you're passing through your colon much more easily, which means your absorption in your small intestine is very much more regulated, more efficient. If you don't have that, you can get situations like chronic constipation, meaning uh, sometimes you have stuff in your colon and you aren't ready to get it out until it's like really full or until it's last minute, or sometimes you're sitting on the toilet for a really long time because it's just not coming out. That is chronic constipation. You aren't fully constipated, but it is a chronic situation that you're getting on a regular basis. Um, this can lead to things like colon cancer, so you don't want this to be a regular thing. You don't want it to be chronic. Just a couple of examples. Average North American, for males in particular, the risk of death by heart attack is about 50% if you're on a meat centered diet. So if you're someone that has meat on a regular basis with every single meal, there's a 50% chance if you are a male that you will have a heart attack at some point in your life. And this can be directly related to your diet. Now, if we change things up a little bit, let's say you don't have meat as your main course. You're still eating meat from time to time, but for your main course, you're having something different. That risk dramatically goes down to 15%. That is huge. So before 1 in 2 people is going to get a heart attack if you're a male, now it's I don't know, I can't do the math. 15 and 100 people are going to um, get ill if or they're going to get a heart attack if they are male. This gets even smaller if you go into a vegetarian slash vegan diet. It goes down to about 4%. So you can see the direct correlation. It's not necessarily the protein, it's the fat that comes with the protein on that meat centered diet. So limiting where you get those foods from, I'm not saying don't eat meats. What I'm saying is limiting where you get them from and having a variety of other sources is extremely good for getting protein into your body. And then there's a big question. If that's the case, should we necessarily all go vegan or vegetarian? And I mean, the simple answer is no. If you want to, power to you. That's entirely your decision if that's something you want to do. There's other aspects, right? Some foods give you some pleasure. They make you feel good. They release that dopamine. A personal opinion, not a biological opinion. Personal opinion is perhaps those other features are actually like they're necessary. It's good to have. So in that case, I wouldn't say limit your diet. On the other hand, I think a better option is to be mindful of what you are eating. Make more science informed decisions on what you're going to be eating. So you don't have to give up on the foods you eat. Just be aware of how much you're having and increase the amounts that you're having by adding more other alternative sources into your diet. In this case, you still get to enjoy the foods that you're eating, but you're spreading that out over a larger um, period of time essentially, and you can still get good protein, but you're limiting bad fats and other bad products that get into your body. So just some food for thought. I've always wanted to say that and make it relevant, but just some food for thought if that's something you're interested in. Anyways, this is going to take us to the end of proteins. I'll see you in a little bit for carbs.